Welcome back to the Springs Radio Real Estate Show. I'm Cheryl Garlock with Colorado Front Range Properties, your host, and my special guest today is none other than Martin Burlingame with Burlingame Insurance. Welcome to the show again, Martin.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You know, we have had a major league setback in our town here. I mean, first it was the fires. Now, I don't really understand. How do we go from fires to flooding?
It's all the flash flooding from the fires. Obviously, the Waldo Canyon specifically, since we're talking about Manitou, the fires cleared out quite a bit of the brush and trees, causing the rain to funnel down into the creeks that lead into the streams and through the town.
All right. Now, you think we're going to be experiencing this problem for how many years where Manitou is concerned?
I think they're talking quite a bit of time. I mean, FEMA has been out there having town meetings with residents in there, and it will continue until they can get vegetation to grow back. And remember, a lot of the mud is pushing off of the hills as the rain hits it and causes these flash floods. So it's eroding as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And yet I think Manitou's still being pretty busy right now, pretty active
I went
and busy.
down there to see some clients, and it is busy down there. It's a beautiful town.
Oh, it is. It's so much fun to hang out
I love
in Manitou.
going down to Manitou.
It's great. I'm sure that, of course, as far as real estate is concerned, that these floods are affecting the values and the homes. I mean, it's got to be affecting the properties there. And I cannot help but imagine that a lot of people who are maybe in the midst of buying a property there might be getting hung up a bit because now the insurance companies are saying, hey, or the underwriters also on the loans are probably saying that we require some flood insurance.
Well, the banks have always required flood insurance if you're in the appropriate flood zones.
Right.
And so they're looking at that and making sure you have the flood insurance. The problem, obviously, with flood insurance is most of the companies are writing through FEMA. They'll put it on their own company paper, but it's underwritten and protected by the federal government. But you're capped at about $250,000 on the value of your house, and then you have some contents that are capped as well. So as long as your house is in that range, you're fine. If you have a more expensive home, you have some exposure if you have some serious damage.
Now, thinking about those more expensive homes, because we do have a lot in that area
Yes.
there that are more expensive than what were you saying?
$250.
Yeah. So can an individual buy a supplemental flood insurance?
There's a couple ways to go about it. You can buy excess flood insurance, which goes on top of the government-issued flood insurance. There are rules on the FEMA policy that people should read the policy on number of homes or number of acres of damage that have to occur for a flood to be declared. Or you can go private flood insurance. And there are companies that sell private flood insurance as well. There's maybe a half dozen of them out there. It is significantly more expensive because they insure your structure against flooding, and it doesn't require the government declaring a flood or the government requirements to assess a flood.
I'm glad you mentioned that there because I remember talking about flooding before and reading that in order to be declared that you were a victim of a flood or your property is a victim of flood, didn't it have to happen like 3 adjacent properties or something?
There's rules on the distance and the size and the number of properties affected. And in some of the areas, you'll have one house that's lower than the others, and they could be the only house that's affected by the flood because the others are at a higher elevation, and so now you're stuck with one house. And so you have to read your policy. I mean, that's the number one thing. When you get your flood policy, you need to read it. People tend to forget. In fact, I'm sitting here holding your homeowner policy.
Oh,
you
that's
and I
right.
were going through to make sure you got all the right coverages on there. So just read your policy, sit down with your insurance agent, and make sure you have exactly what you need and the values match what you need.
Absolutely there. Now, speaking about FEMA, I don't know how long ago it was that they drew their maps, their boundaries, but do they do that periodically through different regions at different times based on whatever the latest thing or trend has been happening?
They update the maps. It's not the quickest process. Quite often, people are trying to petition their property off a floodplain because if any part of the building structure is in the floodplain, the building is deemed to be in there. So sometimes the floodplains, and they come out with letters. So you have different valuations, and that affects your rate. So as you get closer and lower elevation, closer to the water, your risk gets higher because obviously if the river or the creek or whatever floods, it's going to rise, and if you're closer to it, you're going to be impacted. And so sometimes people's footprint has a small corner in a different elevation, and so they have to deal with trying to petition to get that either moved off of it or have this thing rezoned to make sure the building's not in the lower elevation.
It's so funny here. I I got one for you that you'll laugh at there. Have you ever heard of a house that was dedicated, half of it was in a floodplain and the other half was not?
Yes.
I actually sold one of those.
Yes, and you're stuck, right? You have a house that's in a floodplain. In fact, we just had a large commercial property that had 2 square feet.
No kidding.
The corner of the building at a lower elevation, and just on the maps, and it's all driven now. I mean, it's all computer driven.
Yeah.
So it's not like anyone's out there measuring your house. It's,
right.
It picks it up and tells you what's in there, and then you can get the government to come out and you get the assessment people to determine exactly what's in there. But all the information is put into a computer system, and it gives you a letter. It gives you a zone map.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you, speaking of those maps there, I'm going to give you guys a secret here about how to figure out if your house is really in a floodplain or not, because I did have this happen to me on a real estate deal 20 years ago. I thought it was really cool that this house was on this super big, wide street, and it was like a single-lane street, but just nice, big, the kind you can do U-turns in, that kind of a deal. Well, then when we sold the house and the buyer was getting their loan, the underwriter came back and said, oh, it's in a floodplain. And I said, it can't possibly be. I see this little hill thing that's sitting on there. So let me tell you what your secret ammo is here. You go down to the county and you look at the planning and zoning department and you look at the actual map, the plat map for that property against the floodplain. And I did that for my client. And as it turned out, as you mentioned, Martin, flood insurance is really, really expensive here. We were able to go ahead and get the underwriter to see, in fact, that property was not in a floodplain at all.
Which is important.
It is really important.
The flip side now is, if you are in a floodplain, you want to make sure you're insured correctly.
Absolutely.
Because we are seeing flooding. I mean, there was just a couple homes very badly damaged.
All right. And then, of course, we have all the flooding that's been happening now in Black Forest.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, we got this hot tinderbox area, dry, dry, dry. And in 2 weeks in a row, we have, I think it's off of Shoup Road or something like that there, where we had this swimming pools that are happening from the flooding there. Where is all that coming from? Is that just from rain?
It's rain, and everything funnels. And when the vegetation's gone, it's not pulling the...
It's not holding it back.
It's not holding the water back. It's the problem you have with erosion on the hills.
Right.
I mean, if the vegetation's gone, the water streams and takes mud with it.
Yeah, right. Gosh, there's just a lot of things to be thinking about when you're out there buying a house or you own a house there, and you've kind of got to think about some of the extra environmental areas there that come associated with that. Okay, you guys, you know what? We're going to be doing Property Showcase here coming up. You need to stay tuned. You have got to get your paper and pencils ready here because I've got 3 great properties I'm going to share with you. You don't want to miss it. You're going to want to sit down and make note of these particular properties. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.